I introduce Mr. Manish Kumar, who is Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of NSDC. His area of expertise lies in public service, water and sanitation. Presently, he is Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of NSDC. He is an IAS officer of 1991 batch. He has rich experience of over 24 years spread across various roles with national and international and home department. Mr. Kumar is a senior water and sanitation specialist. He also worked with UNICEF and known as a senior institutional development specialist and country coordinator. He has worked in World Bank also, and currently NSDC is doing wonderful job spilling millions of youth of our country. So with this short introduction, I now invite Mr. Manish Kumar to give his address. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I will keep my talks around few key points on what NSDC does, probably starting from a aeroplane view of what the system looks like, and then coming down to some of the brass tacks on operational aspects and how we could actually work together that we could benefit mutually. So I think I'll put it from that perspective. Few corrections. One is about myself. I'm basically a public-private partnership specialist, and I've worked in different sectors. That's the thesis of my topic, and that's my PhD dissertation, and that's what I've been doing for most of my life. I've worked in different sectors, though, so just wanted to make that clear. And NSDC, interestingly, is a public-private partnership which was created by Government of India. This was set up in 2009 with the expectation that both the private sector and the government would put money into skills because globally, if you look at how skills take root, it's basically the private sector which puts in a lot of money because they gain out of it eventually. So there are countries, for example, Singapore, we need to pay a cess for skilling, and you can get that back as a reimbursement if you have skilled certain number of people and absorb them. So that's the method they follow, and different countries have different ways. In India, it was envisaged at that point that money would be put both by the private and the government. And over the last 9-10 years, the government has put about 6,000 crore, the private has put 10 crore. So that's one big disjunction that you will find. And the other part of it, we can, if I were to be a little more liberal, is the fact that we do engage private sector in many of the infrastructure that we have created, and in those, 30% of the cost is put by the private sector. So how much is that? That's about 1,000 crore. If I were to be very liberal, that's about what private sector has placed. So what I'm trying to basically emphasize is if I were to look from a macro view, that this is a joint responsibility. The country has to get skilled. It is not government's responsibility alone. It is both the government and the private sector. The private sector has to be together in that game. It's a three-legged race. You can't just run alone. You have to run together on this. So I think how do we do that? That's the, I think, key thing. And NSDC, as somebody which is in between both the government and the private, actually tries to play that balancing role. That how could we ensure private sector gains, but not at a cost that the government feels that the entire system is set up very unjustly for them. So that balancing act is what we play from our perspective. Now let me bring to your attention a few global things that are happening and some of the analytics which are done within India that shows need for correction, and these corrections are necessary from the private sector side. Globally, if you look at the trend, look at it from 1985 onwards. I'm talking a few countries in the West, I'll not name them. And this is true about India too, because there are global companies which operate within India. You'll find that the returns to capital and the returns to labor actually begins to diverge after 1985. If you look at the graph from 1940, it remains more or less constant. Thereafter, 1985 onwards, the return to labor actually becomes flat. The return to capital just climbs on. It goes very sharply upwards. And then eventually, it also begins to decline. And this is the trend in several countries, to name a few. US, UK is two of them. So is it in the case of India. What it implies essentially is that the world is developing, we are not giving money to the labor. That's what it means. Now, I don't want to say more than that globally, but if I were to look at my analytics, I do my analytics to understand why skilling doesn't happen, or why there is so much of attrition. Why is it that we skill people and they are unwilling to move to where the jobs are? We have found that in average, a person who has done a PMKVY training gets about 8,500 rupee. That's a new entrant into labor workforce who's got skilled. It's very interesting to note that had he not got skilled, he would have got 24% less. So therefore, a 3 to 4 months skilling actually has enhanced his ability in terms of how much wage he can command. The premium is there. So therefore, I would say that the industry respects that particular part of the skill that has come into him. Unfortunately, if you look at what is his aspiration from life, you will find that his aspiration is actually 18,000 rupees. That's his aspiration. So you pay him 8,500, his aspiration is 18,000. Somebody pays him 500 rupee more, he leaves. And that's the reason why you find attrition so high. It's also very interesting that less educated you are, higher is the chance that you will get more wage. More educated you are, the wage differential becomes smaller. That's a typical trend which the data is speaking for. So I just wanted to lay these facts because I think it's important to keep that big perspective in mind. In my worldview, I always see India in two parts. There is 30% of India, which is in this room, which is of a very different category. And there's a 70% of India, which I usually see in two parts. There are 20% of people who are below the poverty line, and there's 50% of people who are above the poverty line, but below twice the poverty line. So that is our character, the character of this country. So when we speak of India, I think we have to remember that 70% who might not be in this room, but to whom I think the skilling is most important, and to whom eventually, whether we fail or we succeed, is their failure or success which really will matter, not our success or failure. We can live our life. So I think this particular part I wanted to put in perspective, because it's important to remember that when public money is put, and here it was 6,000 crore of government, the target is very different. The target is not this room. It's a different room which is being targeted for good reasons. And I think the private money needs to come if you really want it to succeed in the manner that you think it should. So we of course are in a process of actually attracting private sector money. Our last board meeting held about 3 days back had impact investment funds from Singapore talking about $100 million US dollar fund to be set up for skill development. There is a proposal from International Finance Corporation to put money into NSDC for private sector participation in skilling. So there's a lot of new initiatives which are coming up, and I will encourage those who are interested to actually come in and participate, because that's the way we can go forward if we really want to skill India into the future. So these few thoughts I wanted to share at the macro level because I thought it would give a bit of understanding of the complexity within which we operate, and also the opportunity that actually exists in skilling. One particular factor about skilling which I wanted to share, and it's very powerful, is a reason of why IFC wants to invest in National Skill Development Corporation. So I was asking International Finance Corporation, why would you put money into a non-government organization? I mean, non-NGO, which is not for profit, and I'm not going to give you back any money. So his explanation was very unusual, and he said that in the past, the pension funds of Europe and US had invested big time in India on NBFCs for microfinance, and they made a lot of money in that. They found India as a very attractive country in terms of investing in things which are very unusual. And they say that when they are putting money into NSDC with the thought about skilling, it is not with the focus on India. They said that the countries that you are creating, the training partners that you are creating, are the ones which will actually go and skill in Africa. And it's Africa which is going to train in big numbers from 2025 onwards. So they have a 30-year horizon, and they start thinking from 2025 now. So That's the reason why they want to put. And that's because of the demographic window of opportunity that we currently have, starting 2005, maybe ending 2050, so in the middle of it. The African countries will begin to have them from 2025 onwards, and probably will continue up to 2075 and little longer after that. So that's the reason why there is interest out there. So I think these macroeconomic things are important for any one of you who are interested in getting deeper into these perspectives. But coming back to some of the operational issues, with about investment of about 1,000 crore, we have over time opened more than 10,000 training centers across India, which do two types of skilling: fee-based skilling for those which are high-end courses. So mostly pharma and others will be in the high end, and then there are low-end courses which are meant for relatively different types of sectors like retail and others. We work in 38 different sectors. So these 10,000 centers in every year approximately turn out about 50 lakh people, skilled people, of which we anticipate at least 50% plus are employed. The remaining 50% don't get employed for two reasons. One is perhaps their skill is not built enough. So we have found people wanting to get into or getting into healthcare, but eventually finding that they really can't handle healthcare. They had got into it because they thought there's a lot of money. And then they realized that when you have to handle a patient, it's not that really that easy at all. So therefore, we have begun counseling now so that a student, before he actually enters any skilling, understands whether he has the internal capacity to do it or not. And second, a lot of people who get skilled but are not willing to move because, again, the same differential that I mentioned about money, and therefore they are not willing to move. So this is the number of training centers and number of people which comes out. When I look at pharma, I looked at the data in the Life Sciences Sector Skill Council, and we skill only about 10,000 people every year, of which about 60% actually get jobs. So that's about what we do in the pharma sector. So it means that there is a lot of opportunity here for skilling. I think for some reason the Sector Skill Council I think has not been able to expand as much as we would wish in this one. This probably is because of and this was also discussed in the room where we were sitting, is because of the high capex of the training centers that you might have to create for pharma and bioscience. So what we were suggesting is that we go for a different model for this, a new model that is evolving, where we say the skilling starts with an employer focus on actually recruiting people and getting them into jobs. So this is a new thing which is coming up. It will start from June and July. But I thought this sector would be one which will be highly suitable for this model. And one of the reasons why I'm here is essentially to understand and see if we can get it pushed into this sector, whose growth has been relatively slower compared to many other sectors that we have, but the need is extremely high. Also for the fact that if you want capital of the world, then I think we need to be there everywhere. In every sector, we need to be there. So this is one idea which I leave behind, and an area where we could actually work together. We have actually an officer here based in Mumbai, and therefore, if you are interested, you can get in touch with us. We'll be very interested in taking that forward. And the second is the potential for embedding the courses that you have in either apprenticeship, about which the CEO of Sector Skill Council spoke about. And this apprenticeship, as he mentioned, has got highly simplified. It has been taken up by NSDC only in last 6 months, or less than last 6 months actually. And we have a world-class platform, which is online platform that will come up. I think it's already operational, but in its full form, it's likely to be ready by 1st of January. And you would be able to sign contracts in that, and you will receive money in case you're applying for. So everything happens digitally. There's no human interface in between. So therefore, nobody to trouble you, which was usually the fear about apprenticeship. Somebody said apprenticeship didn't do very well. You have to thank your luck for that, because actually it's requirement of law. And if supposing the government had really got tough on apprenticeship, then many companies would have been in trouble, because by law, you are required to have at least 2% of your workforce and up to 10% as apprenticeship. In fact, the law has been simplified now to such an extent that if you ended up having more than 10%, then the additional person can be counted in your CSR. So that's something which you might want to make use of, because that's, I think, a very clever use of law, and it saves you the obligation of CSR, which for many actually can be a bit of trouble. So I think apprenticeship is one of the areas, as I mentioned, where we could work together. The second where we could work together is a big change that's coming up from the Ministry of Human Resource Development Department, the Ministry of HRD. They're making a major change in how they undertake courses at graduate and postgraduate levels, where they're going to allow embedding of courses that are highly oriented towards skills. So if you were to take, or if you are doing history, you could actually end up doing a small 3 months to 6 months course that might be pharma related. Purely because you understand that history may not get you a job. You might think so, and therefore you feel that this might get you a job, and why not take this? So there is a kind of thinking which is happening in MHRD, Ministry of Human Resource Development, which I think would transform the way skilling is done at the moment, particularly at levels like level 5 and upwards. Like we do a lot of work, as I mentioned, level 4 and below, because our target is 70% of India. But the other part is important too, and level 5 upwards is something which HRD could actually do excellently, and I guess we need to keep an eye open for that, and that could be a huge opportunity coming up. One more thing which I wanted to emphasize, or two more. One is the general belief that India is not skilled, I think is not true, because we don't count ourselves in that, unfortunately. We need to. If you look at when we say that South Korea 96% is skilled, it doesn't mean 96% are carpenters. They count themselves. I mean, but I think there is a kind of aspirational issue in India, and generally people think skill in a little lower sense, and therefore don't like to count themselves in. Anybody who has analytical ability has skills, and if you are being paid for the work that you do, you have some skills for which the economy is paying you. So we need to count that, and we recently did, with the help of CMIE, an all India survey to get a sense of what percentage of India is skilled, our workforce, and we found that actually 43% of India is skilled. It's just that a large number of workforce is not recognized. So many of us have certificates which will imply that you have certain skills. So I could be a skilled person in public-private partnership, and many of us, or each of us, will have something to say about it. But when it comes to somebody who has been doing a trade, is being paid by the company, has been doing that particular role for the last 10, 15 years as a carpenter or welder, he definitely is skilled, because he's spent maybe half his lifetime in that, but he is not recognized for his skills. So there is a government scheme called Recognition of Prior Learning, RPL as we call it in short. And the responsibility of recognition of prior learning, the certification responsibility, has been given away to employers now. So that's a major change from the past, when the Sector Skill Council would do that. Even now the Sector Skill Council facilitates, but the responsibility is entirely given to the employer, and the person who undergoes the RPL gets certified as well as gets paid for the time that he spends in getting that particular certification. So this is one important change because of two reasons I'll mention. One is when we did a random sample survey to understand what happens to somebody who gets this RPL certification, we realized that 47% of them reported back saying that their wages changed, their wages improved over time. So that's a very positive statement. But 63% of them specifically, which really made us happy about, mentioned that they feel much more respected in the workplace after this certification. So a lot of pride which comes to your job, and the aspirational value that often is diminished when we talk about skills comes back when we do RPL. And the second part which I want to emphasize is great interest across the world for skilled people from India. So we recently had a discussion with the Minister for Human Resource and Amortization in UAE, where he said that he doesn't just want people who are blue collars, but also white collar Indians, because, and he mentioned specifically that why don't you guys send Sundar Pichai to UAE? Why only to US? So he basically, his statement was that he wants high-end people in UAE because they want to turn UAE into a knowledge economy. And they know that this is not going to last forever in oil. So a lot of interest from that side. On the other hand, we also have interest from Japan. And recently, for example, we sent to Tamil Nadu, from Tamil Nadu, about 15 children who were skilled in automobile engineering. And we found that these guys spoke only two languages, Tamil and Japanese. So we teach Japanese too. I mean, we teach several languages. We teach languages so that people can go abroad. So there is a lot of interest which is emerging, where we train skilled people here, send them abroad to countries where we have been traditionally going, to countries where we have not been traditionally going, but there is a demand. So I guess that's another area where you might want to think about partnering, because one of the reasons why we send people to Japan is they work in a highly competent environment, in an environment which has high technological ability, and we want them back after 5 years, because when they come back, they are going to be highly skilled people within India. And that's the long-term goal also. As we all know, knowledge is something which is not acquired overnight. It requires planning, it requires thinking, it requires persisting. So I guess with skill also remains the same, and we are pushing in that direction. Overall, I see the prospects good for India. Our GDP is growing. It can't be that we are doing very poorly in every front and still our GDP is growing. We are quite self-critical, and therefore I think tend to question ourselves far too much. But my own perspective of where India is moving is generally very positive, and I generally feel that we are in the right track. I'll give you just one example of how much difference will skill make, and this particular time when we are in demographic window of opportunity is going to make. Go back to 1950, look at Korea. Look at the per capita income of Korea. It was less than that of India. And then it changed from 1950 to 2000, it had multiplied by 38 times. Why? Because 1950, it entered its demographic window of opportunity. So by 2000, when it ended, it's usually a 40, 50 year period, it had multiplied 38 times. India entered its demographic window in 2005. We have multiplied already by 6 times. I'm quite sure by 2050, we will multiply at least 35 times. So we are well on track for that. I think we owe it to the next generation to be right about this. So far it looks so good. But I do hope that all of us will work together in taking it forward. Thank you so much for giving me this chance.
Any question to Mr. Manish Kumar from the audience? Okay, so it's a